The story begins on a warm summer evening. The sun had just begun to set, casting a soft golden glow over the small neighborhood where a little black girl lived with her mother and stepfather. It seemed like just another ordinary evening, but for the young girl, this evening was different. She had been carrying a heavy secret for so long, one that she could no longer hold inside. The girl, let's call her Maya, had always been a bright and kind soul. She was loved by her teachers, and her friends enjoyed her cheerful spirit. However, at home, things were not as they seemed. For months, Maya had been feeling scared, confused, and trapped in her own home. She didn't feel safe, and no one seemed to notice. Her stepfather, who she had once trusted, had changed over time. His behavior had shifted from caring to something else, something that made Maya feel uncomfortable, something that made her wish she could disappear. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. It started with small things. Maya began noticing her stepfather becoming more distant, cold even, and sometimes he would get angry for no reason at all. She didn't know what to do or who to turn to. When she tried to tell her mother, she didn't know how to explain it. She felt embarrassed, confused, and afraid. Her mother loved her deeply, and Maya didn't want to hurt her by saying something that could break their family apart. So she kept quiet, pretending everything was fine, even though her world felt like it was crumbling. One day, while Maya was at school, her teacher noticed that something was off. Maya, normally so full of energy, seemed quieter than usual. Her clothes weren't as neat, and she seemed distracted. The teacher gently pulled her aside and asked if everything was okay. At first, Maya hesitated. She didn't know how to explain what was happening at home. But the teacher's kindness and concern made Maya feel safe for the first time in a long while. She began to open up, slowly at first, but then the words poured out of her. She told her teacher about her stepfather's strange behavior, how he made her feel uneasy, and how she was scared to go home. The teacher's heart broke as she listened to Maya's story. She knew immediately that something needed to be done. With careful consideration, the teacher contacted child services and informed them about Maya's situation. Maya was still in shock when the authorities arrived, but when she saw the police, she realized that someone finally believed her. Maya was scared, but she felt a glimmer of hope. She was about to tell the truth that had been weighing on her young heart for so long. The police officers were kind, speaking to Maya gently, assuring her that they would help. They took her to a quiet room where they could talk. Maya shared everything she could remember about what had been happening at home. Her words, though shaky, were powerful. The officers listened carefully, their faces filled with concern. It was then that Maya knew, this time, someone was going to listen. This time, someone was going to help her. The weight on her chest started to lift, and for the first time, she felt like she might be able to breathe again. The beginning of the story is painful, but it marks a turning point. Maya's cry for help had been heard, and the truth was finally coming to light. She had found her voice, and that was the first step toward finding the safety and support she so desperately needed. After Maya's brave decision to speak up, the room where she sat felt different, less heavy, less overwhelming. The police officers reassured her, telling her that she had done the right thing. She wasn't alone anymore. It was as though a door had opened to a new world, one where her fears would finally be acknowledged and addressed. Maya's mother, who had been unaware of the pain her daughter had been hiding, was contacted immediately. When she received the phone call from the police, her world came crashing down. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her first instinct was shock. How could this have been happening under her roof? The guilt hit her hard. She had always tried to protect Maya, but now she realized how much her daughter had been suffering in silence. The police told her that they would be coming over to speak with her, and that Maya would need her support. As Maya's mother hung up the phone, a mix of emotions flooded her heart. Anger, confusion, disbelief, but mostly fear. Fear of what the police would find, and fear of the unknown. How would her life change after this? Could she have done something sooner? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing. Her daughter needed her now more than ever. The officers arrived at the family's house shortly after the phone call. Maya's mother tried to steady her breath, doing her best to hold herself together as she opened the door. When she saw the police, the weight of the situation began to sink in. She was no longer the mother who had everything under control. She was now part of an investigation that could alter her life forever. Maya, who had been sitting in another room, felt both relieved and scared as her mother walked in. For a moment, their eyes met. Maya was unsure if her mother would be angry or disappointed, but instead, she saw something different: love, but also fear and confusion. The warmth she had always felt from her mother was still there, but there was a new layer of uncertainty that Maya hadn't noticed before. The officers, understanding the emotional strain this was causing, spoke gently to Maya's mother. They assured her that this was about helping her daughter, not blaming her. The most important thing was to make sure Maya was safe and to figure out how to move forward from here. Maya's mother, overwhelmed with emotions, nodded but remained silent. She had no idea what would happen next, but she was determined to support her daughter, no matter what. The police then turned their attention to the stepfather. They needed to speak with him and ask about the allegations that had been made. Maya's stepfather, who had been caught off guard by the police's arrival, looked nervous as he was questioned. The atmosphere in the house was tense, and everything that had once felt familiar now seemed strange and foreign. The house that Maya had called home felt like a place full of shadows, and the once ordinary walls now seemed to hold countless secrets. As the conversation unfolded, Maya's stepfather denied the accusations. He seemed defensive, his words stammering as he tried to explain himself. The officers weren't convinced by his explanations and made it clear that they would be conducting a thorough investigation. The atmosphere remained heavy, and every minute felt like an eternity. Maya's heart raced, but she knew this was just the beginning. The truth was coming to light, and nothing would stop it now. The evening that had begun so quietly was now filled with a whirlwind of emotions. The discovery of the truth was only just beginning, and it would change the course of Maya's life forever. But as she sat in the room, surrounded by the warmth of the officers' support and her mother's silent presence, she knew one thing for sure: she was finally being heard. The next few days after the police arrived felt like a blur for Maya and her mother. It was hard to grasp what was happening, and the emotions were overwhelming. Maya's mother, still in shock, tried to piece together everything she had learned about her daughter's pain. She couldn't stop thinking about the many moments she had missed, the signs she hadn't seen, the quiet sadness that had slowly taken over her daughter's life. It was almost as if the love they shared had been interrupted by something Maya couldn't explain before. The guilt weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't help but ask herself why she hadn't noticed sooner. Maya, on the other hand, found it hard to believe that she had spoken the truth aloud. She had kept the secret for so long, the fear of it being discovered holding her back. But now that the truth had come to light, things felt strange. She wasn't sure what to expect, how things would change. The love she had always felt from her mother was still there, but there was also a sense of uncertainty that Maya hadn't felt before. Her mother wasn't the same. She was trying to be supportive, but Maya could see the hurt in her eyes. She knew her mother was torn, struggling with the idea that she hadn't been able to protect her. As the police continued their investigation, they gathered evidence and spoke with neighbors and friends who had witnessed things that made them raise their eyebrows. There were small, unspoken signs that people around Maya had noticed, small changes in the way her stepfather acted, the sudden tension in the house whenever Maya's mother wasn't around. The police were thorough, and they pieced everything together with the careful precision that would help ensure justice. Maya's mother had moments where she felt confused about what to believe. She loved her daughter deeply, but part of her struggled with the idea that her husband, someone she had trusted and loved for years, could have been responsible for such painful actions. She had known him for a long time, and never thought he was capable of something like this. But now, everything seemed to fall apart. Could she have been blind to the truth? Could she have missed the signs that Maya had been trying to show her? The questions were endless, and the answers seemed hard to find. All she knew for sure was that Maya needed her now more than ever. Her mother spent hours speaking with counselors and child welfare workers, trying to understand how to best support Maya through this traumatic time. Maya's emotional state was delicate. Every conversation, every word, seemed to affect her deeply. The counselors explained that Maya's reactions were normal. Fear, confusion, even anger. They told her mother that the process would take time, and that Maya would need all the support she could get, but also that she had to feel safe before anything else. Maya, too, was learning how to cope with everything that had happened. There were days when she felt strong, like she could conquer the world. But there were also moments when everything felt too much, when her mind was clouded with memories she didn't want to remember. She clung to the idea that things would get better, that she could rebuild her life and trust people again. It was hard, but she knew she was on the right path. The hardest part was seeing her mother so upset. Maya wanted to comfort her, but she couldn't. Instead, they both struggled in silence, leaning on each other when they could, but also drifting into their own worlds of hurt and confusion. As Maya's stepfather continued to deny everything, the investigation grew more intense. The police were relentless, determined to find the truth no matter how long it took. Their questioning, their findings, all pointed to one undeniable fact. Something had been terribly wrong in that house, and it had been going on for a long time. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Maya's courage to speak up had been the key to unlocking the truth. It was hard, but it was the right thing to do. The investigation was still ongoing, but Maya and her mother began to slowly pick up the pieces of their broken lives. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, they felt like they might be able to walk it together. Maya was no longer alone in her pain, and her mother was learning how to stand beside her, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. They would take it one step at a time, finding strength in each other's presence, and with every day that passed, the hope for a brighter future started to shine through the darkness. As the investigation into Maya's allegations progressed, the weight of the situation began to settle more heavily on everyone involved. Maya's mother had always trusted her husband, but now, with everything coming to light, she couldn't help but question everything about their life together. The house, once a place of comfort and warmth, now felt like a prison, filled with uncertainty and fear. Maya's mother spent sleepless nights replaying memories in her mind, trying to find signs that she had missed. She couldn't help but wonder how her love for her husband had clouded her judgment, and it hurt her to think that she hadn't noticed her daughter's suffering. Maya, too, was struggling with what was happening. Every time she heard another piece of the investigation unfold, she felt her heart sink a little more. Though she had found the courage to speak up, it didn't make the reality any easier to bear. The memories of what had happened were still fresh in her mind, and as the investigation continued, she found herself reliving them. She had hoped that once the truth was known, things would start to feel better, but it didn't happen right away. She felt confused and torn between hope and fear. Would her family ever be the same again? Would she ever feel safe in her own home? The police worked tirelessly to gather evidence and speak to more people who might have noticed something unusual. They interviewed neighbors and friends, and slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Maya's stepfather had tried to present himself as a caring and responsible man, but the more the authorities dug into his past, the more his lies unraveled. There were whispers about his behavior in the neighborhood, small, unsettling things that no one had ever thought to connect until now. It was as though everyone had been living with their eyes closed, too afraid to question what they saw. Despite the increasing evidence, Maya's stepfather continued to deny any wrongdoing. He was defensive and adamant in his claims that he was being misunderstood. His words, however, no longer carried the same weight as they once did. The officers had uncovered inconsistencies in his story, and the truth was starting to become clear. Maya's bravery in coming forward had made all the difference. The police could now see that the situation was much worse than they had initially suspected. For Maya's mother, the truth was painful, but it was also a relief. She knew that her daughter's courage would eventually bring justice, but it didn't make the process any easier. She felt torn between her love for her daughter and the heartache she felt over the betrayal by her husband. Still, she was determined to be there for Maya, to help her heal, and to make sure that justice was served. No matter how hard it was, she knew that her daughter needed her more than ever, and she couldn't turn away. Maya, on the other hand, began to feel a small sense of peace as the investigation continued. The police were gathering everything they needed to take action, and it felt like a weight was slowly lifting off her shoulders. She was still scared and uncertain about what the future held, but she had a growing sense of hope. She was no longer alone in her fight. The community, her teachers, and the authorities were all standing beside her, and for the first time, she felt like she was truly being supported. As the police pieced together more of the story, they began to get a clearer picture of what had been happening in the house. Maya's stepfather's behavior had been carefully hidden, and it was only because Maya had been brave enough to speak out that the truth was finally coming to light. The investigation was far from over, but every step they took brought them closer to understanding the full scope of what Maya had endured. Maya's journey was just beginning, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had taken the first steps toward healing, and though the road ahead was long and difficult, she was ready to face whatever came next. The pain of the past couldn't be erased, but with every day that passed, Maya grew stronger. And with her mother by her side, they knew they could overcome whatever challenges the future held. As the days went by, Maya and her mother continued to navigate the emotional turmoil that had suddenly become their lives. Every day felt like a new challenge, filled with emotions they hadn't expected to feel. For Maya, the hardest part was still dealing with the memories that haunted her. Even though she had found the courage to speak out, there were times when it felt like the weight of the past was too heavy to bear. She tried to focus on the support she was receiving from the people around her, but there were still moments when she felt lost and unsure about what the future would look like. Maya's mother, too, struggled with the fallout from the investigation. She had always prided herself on being a good mother, always doing what was best for Maya. But now, everything she thought she knew was being questioned. The guilt she felt was overwhelming, and she found herself thinking about the times she had unknowingly turned a blind eye to Maya's suffering. How could she have not seen the signs? Her love for her daughter was immense, but it was now coupled with regret and doubt. She wished she had known sooner, wished she had been able to protect Maya from the pain she had endured. The investigation, however, continued to move forward. The police had gathered enough evidence to start building a solid case. They interviewed more witnesses, including some who had noticed strange things in the household, odd interactions, the tension in the air whenever Maya's stepfather was around. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Maya's decision to speak up had been the turning point in the case. Without her bravery, no one would have known the truth. For Maya, it was difficult to fully grasp the impact of her actions. At first, she had only wanted to escape the fear that had gripped her for so long. But now, as she saw the investigation unfold, she realized that her voice had made a real difference. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a story that could help others. Her courage had set something in motion, something that could prevent more people from suffering in silence. Maya's mother began to focus more on helping her daughter heal. They started attending therapy together, where Maya could express her feelings and her mother could begin to process her own emotions. The therapists emphasized that healing would take time, and that it was okay to feel a mix of emotions. They reminded Maya's mother that this wasn't her fault, that no one could have predicted what had happened. But still, the guilt lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that she should have known. Despite the emotional challenges, Maya's strength became more apparent every day. She began to show signs of resilience, even though there were still moments when the fear and sadness threatened to overwhelm her. The support she was receiving from her friends, teachers, and the counselors helped her move forward. Every small victory, a kind word from a friend, a moment of laughter, felt like a step in the right direction. As the investigation continued to unfold, more details about Maya's stepfather's behavior came to light. The police had uncovered a history of manipulation and deceit that extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. It became clear that Maya's stepfather had been hiding his true nature for a long time, carefully constructing a facade that had fooled everyone, including Maya's mother. But now, the truth was coming out. Every new discovery made Maya feel a little more at peace. She knew that it wasn't her fault, that she hadn't caused any of this. She had done the right thing by speaking up. And though the pain was still fresh, there was a glimmer of hope that one day she would be able to heal completely. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Maya and her mother were determined to keep moving forward. With each passing day, they learned to lean on each other more. Maya's bravery had sparked a change, and though the process of healing would take time, they were no longer trapped in the darkness. Together, they were learning to find light in the smallest moments, finding strength in the love they shared and in the support of those around them. And for the first time in a long while, Maya felt like she had a future worth looking forward to. The days after Maya's stepfather was arrested felt surreal. The house, which had once felt so familiar, now seemed cold and unfamiliar. Maya and her mother struggled to adjust to their new reality. The arrest had brought some relief, but it didn't erase the pain or the confusion. It didn't change the fact that their lives had been turned upside down. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anger, sadness, and now they were left to face the aftermath of it all. Maya's mother found herself struggling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was relieved that her daughter was no longer in danger. But on the other hand, she felt a deep sense of betrayal. The man she had trusted and loved had turned out to be someone she could never have imagined. It was as though the life she thought she knew had been built on lies. Her husband, the man she had married, was now someone she had to come to terms with being completely different from the person she thought he was. The guilt and sorrow were overwhelming, and it seemed like every conversation and every moment in the house brought more painful reminders of the past. Maya, too, was struggling to find her place in the new world she was suddenly living in. She had hoped that when the police arrived and the truth came to light, everything would get better. But it wasn't that simple. The pain of what she had experienced didn't disappear just because the person who had caused it was taken away. The fear, the confusion, the memories, it was all still there. Sometimes, Maya would find herself in the middle of the day, feeling like everything was okay, only to have a wave of sadness and anxiety hit her all over again. The emotional scars were deeper than she had expected. But through it all, Maya was determined to find a way to move forward. The police continued to build their case against Maya's stepfather, gathering evidence and interviewing others who had known him. As they did, more troubling details about his past came to light. There were inconsistencies in his story, and the evidence began to mount against him. It was becoming clear that Maya had been right to speak out, and that her bravery was the key to unraveling the truth. But it was also clear that Maya's journey toward healing was far from over. Maya's mother did her best to stay strong for her daughter, but it wasn't always easy. She was learning how to navigate the complex emotions of the situation, how to support Maya without falling apart herself. She began to spend more time talking to counselors, learning how to help her daughter through the healing process. They talked about the importance of creating a safe space for Maya to express her feelings, and how the healing journey was not linear. Some days would be better than others, and that was okay. Maya, too, started attending therapy. The counselors explained that it was normal for her to feel a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and that healing would take time. They assured her that what had happened wasn't her fault, and that she had done the right thing by speaking up. Slowly, Maya began to understand that it was okay to feel the way she did. She didn't have to be strong all the time, and it was okay to ask for help. The community, too, rallied around Maya and her mother. Teachers, friends, and neighbors expressed their support, offering kind words and gestures. Maya's friends at school made sure she knew that she wasn't alone, and they created an environment where she could feel safe. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, there was a sense of comfort in knowing that people cared. Maya's mother also felt the warmth of the community's support, and it helped to ease some of the pain she had been carrying. The investigation into Maya's stepfather continued, and the legal proceedings began to take shape. He was facing serious charges, and the evidence against him was undeniable. But as the case progressed, Maya and her mother knew that it wasn't just about the legal outcome. It was about finding a way to rebuild their lives and heal from the trauma they had endured. Maya's journey toward healing was long, but she had already made the first step by speaking out. She had found her voice, and that had set everything in motion. The support of her mother, the community, and the professionals who were helping her gave her the strength to keep moving forward. Slowly, day by day, Maya was beginning to reclaim her life. The road ahead was still difficult, but for the first time, she felt like there was hope. And with each new day, the future seemed a little brighter. As the legal proceedings moved forward, both Maya and her mother found themselves caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The courtroom became a place where their lives were laid bare, and every detail of the case was examined. Maya's stepfather, now facing serious charges, remained defiant in his denial, but the mounting evidence seemed impossible to ignore. Every day in court felt like a battle, not just for justice, but for the emotional strength to endure the painful process. For Maya, attending the hearings was incredibly difficult. It was hard to sit in the courtroom and listen to all the details being discussed. She had already relived so much in her mind. And now, each time she heard someone speak about what had happened, it felt like a fresh wound. But despite the discomfort, she knew that this was a crucial part of the process. The truth had to come out, and she had to be strong enough to face it. Each day she gathered her courage, telling herself that the pain would eventually fade, and that this was a step toward healing. Her mother, too, had to summon a great deal of strength. Being in the courtroom brought out the worst of her guilt and confusion. She had spent so many years trusting the man she had married, and now that trust was shattered. The realization that she hadn't seen the signs of her daughter's pain haunted her, and the courtroom reminded her of that every time she sat in the audience. But despite her inner turmoil, she remained steadfast. She knew her daughter needed her, and she had to stay strong for her. There were moments when Maya would glance over at her mother, and in those fleeting moments, they found solace in each other's presence. While the legal battle was emotionally taxing, it was also clear that things were changing for the better. The case against Maya's stepfather continued to build. Witnesses testified, and more evidence was presented. The facts began to speak for themselves, and the courtroom seemed to echo with a sense of inevitability. Maya's stepfather, once so confident, was now on the defensive. His claims were crumbling under the weight of the truth. Throughout this process, Maya's resilience grew. She began to realize that while the courtroom was difficult, it was also a place where she could finally confront the past. She had spoken out when she felt powerless, and now her courage was having an impact. With each passing day, she grew more certain that what she had done was the right thing, even though it was so hard. She was learning to face her fears head-on. And though it was painful, it was also empowering. Maya's mother found herself slowly coming to terms with the reality of the situation. She had spent so much time in denial, telling herself that everything would be okay. But now she could no longer hide from the truth. She had to acknowledge that the man she had married wasn't who she thought he was. But through this painful realization, she also came to understand that she could not change the past. All she could do was move forward, with Maya by her side, and work together to heal. It wasn't going to be easy, but the strength they had shown in these past months gave her hope that they could rebuild their lives. Outside the courtroom, Maya began to experience small but significant moments of peace. Her friends continued to support her, and she spent time with people who made her feel safe. School, once a place of fear and anxiety, began to feel more like a sanctuary. Her teachers and classmates were understanding, offering her kindness and patience as she navigated the challenges of daily life. Though the shadows of the past still loomed over her, there was a growing sense of normalcy that began to emerge. The emotional scars Maya carried were far from gone, but with each passing day, she took another step toward healing. The legal case was still ongoing, but it was clear that justice was within reach. Maya's stepfather would face the consequences of his actions, but more importantly, Maya was learning to reclaim her life. She had spoken up when it was hard, and in doing so, she had set the wheels of change in motion. For Maya and her mother, this chapter of their lives was far from over. There was still much healing to be done, and the road ahead would not be easy. But they were no longer alone. They had the support of each other, their community, and the professionals who helped guide them through this process. Slowly but surely, they were rebuilding their lives, one step at a time. And though the scars of the past would never fully fade, Maya was beginning to see that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. As the trial reached its conclusion, Maya and her mother were filled with a mix of emotions. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with unexpected twists. The courtroom had become a place of truth, but also a place of immense discomfort. Every day they spent there felt like they were being pulled in different directions, toward the desire for justice, but also away from the painful memories they were being forced to confront. Despite the challenges, there was also a sense of anticipation in the air. The end was in sight, and with it, the promise of closure, though neither Maya nor her mother truly knew what that would look like. The final days of the trial brought both relief and anxiety. For Maya, the weight of the entire experience seemed to settle heavily on her shoulders. She had already done so much, spoken up, endured painful memories, and fought for the truth to be heard. But now, as the trial neared its end, she was nervous about the outcome. What if it didn't turn out the way she hoped? What if her stepfather still managed to escape the consequences of his actions? The unknown was just as frightening as the past, but Maya found strength in the support she had received from her mother, her friends, and the counselors who had helped her along the way. Her mother, too, felt a mix of emotions. The days leading up to the trial's end had been difficult for her. She had spent so much time questioning her own role in the situation, wondering if there was something more she could have done. The guilt she carried was something she was learning to live with, but it was far from easy. She knew the truth now, and the pain of seeing her daughter suffer would always be with her. But through it all, she had remained steadfast in her support for Maya. She knew that their relationship, though scarred, had become stronger because of the challenges they had faced together. As the final verdict approached, both Maya and her mother began to reflect on how far they had come. The road ahead was still uncertain, but there was a sense of hope that had slowly begun to grow in their hearts. Maya had found her voice, and in doing so, she had not only helped herself, but had also become an advocate for others who might be suffering in silence. Her bravery had set a powerful example for those around her. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its emotional toll, but Maya was learning that healing was not a straight path. Some days would be harder than others, but she was not alone. When the day finally came, the courtroom was tense. Everyone waited for the judge's final decision. Maya sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly, both of them silently praying that this chapter of their lives would come to an end. The judge entered the room, and the room fell silent. He spoke with authority, carefully weighing the evidence and testimony that had been presented. When the verdict was announced, it was clear that Maya's stepfather would face the consequences of his actions. He was found guilty, and the justice they had hoped for had finally come to pass. For Maya and her mother, the verdict was bittersweet. There was relief, yes, but also an acknowledgement that this chapter in their lives would never be truly over. The scars would remain, but they would heal with time. They could now move forward, with the knowledge that they had done the right thing. Maya had faced her fears, and her courage had led them to this moment. Though the future was uncertain, it was also filled with possibility. Maya was ready to start a new chapter in her life, one where she could reclaim her peace and begin to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. The journey toward healing was far from complete, but as Maya and her mother left the courtroom that day, they did so with a sense of strength they hadn't had before. The weight of the past would always be a part of their story, but it would no longer define them. They had faced the worst together, and in the end, they had come out stronger. Maya's bravery had sparked a change, and as she walked into the future, she knew that she had the power to overcome whatever came her way. In time, Maya would continue her journey toward healing, supported by her mother and the community that had rallied behind her. The road was long, but with each step, they were leaving behind the darkness of the past and moving toward a brighter future, where peace, love, and trust could flourish once again.